schedule. So hello, everybody. I am Jasper Dekker. I'm an Associate Design Director at Smart Design, and I'm very excited to welcome you to our Smart Salon, our monthly Smart Salon, I must say. And tonight's conversation will be on the subject of design and ethics and AI and where all those meet. I am joined this evening by three experts on this topic, as well as my co-host Sophia, an interaction designer at Smart Design. And our guests today all live and breathe ethical design and AI and the challenges that come with that. They deal with that on a daily basis. And we're going to have a chat with them to learn more. And by doing so, we'll cover their points of view on the concerns that so many people have around like responsible use of technology and social media and AI and what we as designers can do to make that better, and how do we know it's better, and also how can we prepare future generations to do it better, and in whatever comes next. So next I will ask to introduce themselves, talk a little bit about a project they're working on, and then we can get going. So Rick, how about you kick us off?
Hey, I'm Rick. I'm the Principal Design Lead for Ethics and Society at Microsoft. I can't talk too much about any projects we're working on right now around AI in specific, but I've been doing this for over 20 years at the intersection of design and creative coding and emerging technologies. And so I was one of the founding members of Ethics and Society around 6 years ago. So we work internally at Microsoft to inform the teams that are implementing these new solutions, how to do it responsibly. And in a way that I think champions and empowers humans and human dignity.
Fantastic. Great, Jeff.
Hey everyone, I'm Jeff Huang. I'm a computer science professor at Brown University. And I can talk about all of the projects we work on, but that would take too long. But in general, my research group works on human-computer interaction. And what the specific sort of focus that we have is how do we actually improve interaction using passively collected behavior data? How do we sort of take advantage of sort of the subtle cues and signals that people give off when they're trying to interact with things to make it easier? So for example, in this picture here, it's about an augmented reality project, and we're trying to figure out exactly how to use sort of like your past ways to touch or interact with virtual objects in order to make it more accurate. And so the focus is a lot about how do we do it locally on your own devices so that you're not giving away your data to the cloud or to an outside service.
All right, that's super cool. Right, our third panelist is Sharon Lope. So go ahead.
Hey everyone, my name is Sharon. I lead the product management team on Ethics and Society. So you can say I'm Rick's partner in not crime, but also Jeff was my professor back at Brown. So it's a lot of collision of worlds in this panel right now. But yeah, to Rick's point, we co-create with product teams. So my job as the PM lead is really thinking about, how do we change the ecosystem around Microsoft and how we build products? Like, how do we bring ethics into that process and for the industry as a whole? And the project I chose, as Rick said, we can't really talk about what we're working on currently, but one of my favorite past projects that we did was one around synthetic voices. So our speech AI system team created a technology called custom neural voice. So based on a few minutes of your voice recording, Jeff, we could create a Jeff voice font and use that voice font to say anything. So a lot of ethical questions around how do we ship a technology like this into the world? Like, should we? And how do we feel good about it? And it was one of my favorite projects because there was a lot, like every question was like a college seminar in itself. And at one point we were asking, if this technology were to be ubiquitous, would we lose value and trust in the human voice as a whole? And so a lot of big questions around that. But yeah, that's me.
All right, great. So yeah, let's get started. So thank you all for your quick intros and projects. And before we start, a little bit of housekeeping. So for everybody attending, there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screens. You can pop in any question there. Sophia will be keeping tabs on those and will submit them to the panel towards the end of the salon. So we'll take like 10-15 minutes towards the end to make sure that we also bring in your points of view and your questions. There is also a chat window for your comments and thoughts throughout. And the panelists can also share links there if any sort of reference comes up. So this session is being recorded, and a summary with all the links will be available in like a week or so on the Smart Design website. So that's it for the housekeeping. So now we can actually begin. Great. So yeah, actually, it's funny that Sharon, you mentioned that, should we launch this technology and this AI because of, the way people might use it that we can imagine now, and those weren't great. So what do we do with that? It's a very relevant question. And in fact, this morning I was browsing my news and actually saw that Google has published something about like a very cool technology that they have using text to images translation, basically similar to like what DALL-E 2 recently in the news also introduced. And as DALL-E 2, Google decided, yep, we're not ready. This should not be publicly available, but it is very interesting. It's very powerful. Having said that, of course, there is so much technology around us that as designers of these digital, mostly digital experiences, we often already know how these products are used once we launch them, when they do actually get launched, right? And we have intentions and we can anticipate use cases to a degree, but we'll never really be fully able to predict, the impact our products have on people and society as a whole. And as these digital products get smarter and increase their reach, they also can increase their impact. So this is a big source of the worries that so many have in a big public debate on technology and responsibility around that and ethics. AI, algorithms, machine learning is manipulating us. It is dictating what we think is what we hear. So I think this really kind of triggered us thinking like we should be talking about this, especially from a designer lens. So that question is really like how to design responsibly with ethics in mind. And it's a huge question. So before we can answer that, we really must first sort of understand what that even means, designing something with ethics in mind. So one reference is at Smart Design, we are still working with Meta in this space, where we only started to answer this question. It is very big question, very complex. And what we did was really through co-creation with teams around the world, we learned that responsible design and use of apps like Instagram, this is what it was about, really means different things for different people, different cultures, different backgrounds, different ways of parenting, especially when it comes to teens. So not only flexible tools such as parental controls in the family center that they launched, it also needs to be complemented with educational guardrails and discussion tools so parents and teens can really figure out together kind of what it means to use social media responsibly. So even though this is not a definitive answer, it is the starting point. It is, the first kind of ways to figure out how to deal with these big questions. And I know that is just one example, and I would love to dive into what the panel is working on and their points of views on how to address these big questions. So the first topic really is one of the biggest concerns we hear about, and that's data collection, privacy issues versus offering people personalized experiences. Like I see all the things that I'm interested in, I get the best ads, or I get like the best recipes for what I like, and I don't even have to pay for it. So that's a weird balance, right? So Jeff, can you tell us a little bit more about your view on that landscape? Like, what do you see happening here?
Yeah, thanks for letting me kick this off. The way I see like the last sort of decade or even two coming to be as designers is that a lot of the things that we're designing are now online experiences, services, subscriptions, things that people are able to use and that can change at any moment. So you're all constantly trying to improve the product or service you're putting out there. And what we love as designers is to be able to see what's actually happening after you release something. You want to know how many people are using it, what are they actually doing? How much time are they spending on it? And what we're sort of slowly becoming is these people that are watching these metrics and doing things to feed the metrics, to increase like sales or increase engagement in the products. And so in the past, this was done by humans, but a lot of this is now automated. Now we're looking at how do we sort of use artificial intelligence and use statistical models to tailor things towards people. And that's, so having a product that's a perpetual sort of a A/B experiment is sort of the standard for a lot of things. And it's tempting. And I think the challenge for us is often to see how, where do we put in sort of the limits to these? How do we constrain it? What kind of information to give users, and to sort of create this balance? Because there's always a tension between, as we're designing things, we want to know more about how people are using the products and to improve things for our metrics, versus for the users, they want privacy. They want to, like you said, use a lot of these free services. So where's that balance, and how do we sort of create a world where there's informed consent and that users can do the things that they want without making sacrifices that are, poor choices.
Right. Yeah. No, really interesting. I mean, yes, I think the key word here is balance, right? How is that? And so where do you feel that balance lies currently, looking at, again, like at the bigger landscape?
Well, right now, the companies have a lot of power. A lot of the people running the product and services are able to track a lot of data. There's marketplaces of data. I think it's because the tools for that are becoming more sophisticated. And as regular people using the products, it's a little bit hard for people to just understand exactly how it all works. The extent of the data collected, where it's used for, and there's not that much transparency when you're using a product of what happens to your data. And I feel like there's a chance for the balance of power to shift towards users again by increasing the transparency, having more choice of what's shared, and just giving sort of the ability to figure out are the benefits outweighing the costs, or vice versa at different moments. So just a more sort of conscious ability to make those decisions would be a big boon for users.
Gotcha. Yeah, really interesting.
Jasper, if I could add to that point, Jeff.
Absolutely.
I love that you use the word power, because I think when we use the words privacy, data collection, it's kind of thrown around as these like buzzwords that don't really resonate anything to us anymore. But I think it's important to remember that privacy is your power, right? Privacy is your power to not be intruded in spaces that you don't want to. And so when companies sell your personal data, they're not selling just your data. They're selling the power to influence you, right? And I think remembering that, because I think right now when users have a consent around the data collection or get their free personalized experience, they're not actually able to do that cost benefit trade-off. They don't understand it's not monetary cost, but they're giving up a cost in a different way. And that's not clear. And so I think that transfer of power, like why tech companies have so much power right now, is that power is broken. That transfer moment is really broken. And so to Jeff's point, we need a lot more transparency around those areas. And it's something that our team has really focused on.
Right.
Exactly.
So it's really like, what is my commodity as a user? It's not money, but it's something else, right? And we don't really see the value of that. Is that what you're saying, Sharon?
I think users, I don't think people, and I don't want to say even the word users, I don't think people understand the consequences and implications of their decisions. Like when they say, hey, I'm going to give my data for this experience, they might not know, like, hey, that company's actually going to share it with like these X other companies.
Right.
And so that's what this really means when I make this decision.
Yeah. Great. Rick, I see you raise your hand, and I'm actually very curious also from your lens as representing a company that a goal of the company obviously is to make money, to offer something people want. There's money to be made, right? It's a company. So what do you see here, Rick?
So I would agree with Sharon, and I'm not representing Microsoft here. I'm one of the design leads with Sharon, and this is the way we talk when we talk about this ethics. We need a lot of people talking about it from different angles. So this isn't representing Microsoft. These are the types of daily and weekly conversations we have. With power, we have to remember that it's not just a question of, is there value and does the person understand the value, which is a challenge because there's a power asymmetry here. Because people, as Sharon was saying, they don't understand what they're giving up, but it's not just the immediate cost, it's also the long-term cost. In America, you can't just, it's not legal to sell something just because you can argue that there is an immediate trade of value. There's still things you can't sell, like you can't buy weapons of mass destruction, regardless of how much you pay for it. Like you can't do that. We have an entire thing around constraining alcohol and drugs and things that can foster addiction. Now you can say that, well, there's a equivalent transfer of value, like I would pay this much for this thing I'm addicted to, and I'd willingly pay for it now, but that long-term cost, so there are laws and regulations. This isn't an open market where anybody can do what they want as long as they can justify immediately. Well, they wanted it, they understood what they were giving up. And I think that's where AI, when we talk about AI specifically in data, it should be, why are we talking about ethics now? And that's because with AI, it has changed the power asymmetry between the people who have it and the people who don't understand what they're giving up in their long-term future, almost like conquerors or colonizers, right, or whatever, going in and negotiating for horrifically small prices, things that the original settlers didn't know what they were giving up. It's in the same thing. I mean, you can be capturing massive data that you want to give away because it's encrypted, so that's fine too, but they'll still have it 10 years from now when that encryption gets broken, and then they'll know everything about you. There's just so many scenarios around here. So it's not just about power and is there consent, but there are things that need to be regulated even in capitalism, things around addiction capitalism that AI is now able to do because you don't understand the long-term costs of what you're giving up, or that you might even want it, but it's a highly addictive transaction that you're paying for. And so you're not thinking of that long-term benefit. So this isn't just with AI, but AI now makes it something we have to think about now because it's non-recoverable failure. And that's a theme I think we'll be repeating throughout this year. With you can't move fast and break things from what you're breaking in society. With AI, these transactions, it could be non-recoverable because you said, well, let's just make it and let's throw it out, and we're used to moving fast and shipping it. I think, Jasper, that's how you framed it. And that's been fine for 20 years before that. But you can't do that now with AI because now it's at such a power that if you ship it and you fail it, you don't get a second chance to fine tune it. It's non-recoverable failure. And as soon as it becomes a non-recoverable failure technology, such as nuclear weapons, right? That's a non-recoverable failure. It completely puts it into a different conversation around ethics than we would about just general technology.
Yeah. No, you're right. And it is definitely a bigger responsibility that comes with that power. I do want to go back to what I heard you say, Rick, about addiction. I heard you use that word, and it has, it has definitely come up also in the public debate. And I'm very interested in it's also this kind of out of balance thing where there are clearly, user engagement KPIs that companies have, like key performance indicators, that are sort of pushed so hard that leads to addiction from the users side, which obviously breaks society as well. So what is your view on that? I know that when we talked before, you had a couple of very interesting points to make there, and I was wondering if this would be a good time to bring those up.
Yeah, I'm happy to go first on that one.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, Rick.
Yeah. Okay. One of the ideas we discussed, and I think this was coming from Meta, I believe, or Zuckerberg, was anti-KPIs, or setting up when you start dealing with these very, very powerful, exponentially powerful technologies that the buying market doesn't understand what they're selling when you have this. Being able to set up ethically based or human dignity based anti-KPIs, that when we see this novel happening, we might be getting into this paperclip maximizer, which I'll let Jeff talk about because he mentioned it last time we were talking. That's fantastic, right? The other aspect, though, actually, I'll stop there and then I'll I want to hear what Jeff and Sharon have to say. With addiction and AI, what has changed is this dynamic we've always had in the design industries and the agency industries. We see this on Mad Men with John Draper, and this kind of shift in the 60s toward reflective design, ego design, branding, right? It's not about the features, it's about who you are and your identity. So AI, since 2012, and with the algorithms and the amount of data we've collected, can now compute our subconscious intent and our subconscious desire. So that power asymmetry is a lot bigger. It's a lot easier to exploit somebody if you can predict where their predilections lie. It's a lot easier to exploit somebody. So this is a power that marketing didn't have before. So where do we cross the line between marketing and persuasion and manipulation? If you can speak directly, you know the person mathematically. You know that if you do this thing here, their internal people, their subconscious will want to move it because we're not nearly as rational as we think we are. So if you can compute somebody's irrationality, you have a significant power asymmetry over them. And if that's not understood by everybody, I think most people would not play the game if they knew that the person you're playing with is a card counter. It's not cheating. They can just problem solve at a significantly higher order than you can. And you're going to lose the game that you think is fair because they can read all of your tells that you don't even know you have. So that's one of the nuances we shift here.
That is a great analogy, actually, or a metaphor almost. Jeff, that was over to you. I think,
I really like that analogy too. I think I've been thinking about it a lot too. But I think going back to your point about addiction, I think part of the cause is that often these products have these measures that they want to optimize for, like clicks, engagement, ad views, and that kind of thing. And it's like those movies where you have a robot that's supposed to take care of a human, and the robot's sort of purpose is to make sure this human is safe. And then it turns out that the way to do is the robot traps the human in a room and never lets them out. And that's like the same situation, right? And so there's sort of an unintended outcome there. Because I don't think I think there are very few designers out there that are like, oh, I'm going to intentionally make an addictive product. Because my students are going out to all these companies and they're working on stuff, and they want to just make things that are useful and good and beneficial to society. But what's happening is that if you sort of don't have the right measures, or even if you just have one measure and you're always trying to optimize that, let's say it's like time spent on a page, then that could easily turn into addiction, because then the things that make people spend the most time are maybe things that make them furious, or things that are maybe misinformation and they're not true, right? So and that causes people to get upset, and that's not good for society, but it optimizes that measure of time spent on page. So I think there's a lot of things that need to happen there. One is sort of like constantly checking the measures to see if they're what you want, maybe having multiple measures, but also trying to measure things that are harder to measure. I think often we go and measure things that are the easiest to measure, like money, right? Like how much ads were clicked on, time spent on page, and all these things are just because we basically can track them for free, but we're not tracking things like user satisfaction, or is this actually good for the person after like 5 years of using Facebook? How is their mental health, or even friendships? Are they actually building stronger relationships? And those things are much harder to measure, but I think those measures are more important and would balance out the sort of quantitative metrics that's sort of automatically trackable.
No, that's a super interesting point, and I think it's those hard to. How do we start measuring that the things that actually matter a little bit, well, ultimately more than the ones that are just easily identifiable? Sharon, what's your point of view on this?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, Jeff, because I think that hard to measure thing is such a through line in this entire conversations. It's what makes ethics so hard. Because when I think about human-centered design, really it's about serving human needs and values, right? And so really, like, when you think about how do you get KPIs that measure up to that? And right now, when you hyper optimize for something like engagement, you get like a slight nuance where you're focused on the human, but in a very different way of like, how do we exploit human cognitive responses and behavior to serve business needs, right? Which is a very slight difference. And so, you know, our team has been thinking a lot about metrics, short-term, long-term, because of corporations and industry, how we're really tied to qualitative metrics. But something that we always push in our culture and leadership is like a lot of good work and intentional work might not be measurable or might not be qualitatively condensed. And like, we have to be aware of that because, and it's hard because that is a lot of how tech-driven development is done, right?
Yeah. So go ahead.
I noticed there's a Q&A question. Do we want to be doing these during the conversation?
If you find one that's really interesting to you, go for it. Absolutely.
I haven't looked at it yet. I was just, just asking as an administrative thing.
Right.
I mean, we could answer this one since we're kind of on the topic. It's more directed towards Sharon as a project manager, but kind of asking, how do you balance the addictiveness, and how might you, the designer might not want to be, but the other stakeholders, like a project manager, for example, might want to make it addictive. So how might you balance that?
Yeah, I'm definitely the bad guy in this scenario, so I totally get that. I think like how I would push it, something I encourage us to think about for a lot of product teams around their KPIs is think about the North Star of your metric. If you're trying to push a metric like engagement all the way, like what does that really look like? Like, do you want your like people on your app to spend 24 hours a day, all their time on your application? Is that like the future of what you want to create? And so I think as a designer, I would push back on your other stakeholders who might be pushing on you of, well, what is our stopping point? Like, what is our optimal point actually look like? Because it might not be as high as we can get it. And I think encouraging, going back to human-centered design, right? Your job is to serve human needs and values. And so what are additional metrics, to Jeff's point, that we could be looking at besides engagement to have a more collective view of how your product is doing? And Jasper, you talked about like, how do we know if we're creating better products? I think we can talk a little bit more about that later.
Yeah, would love to.
I have one thing on this question.
Go for it, Rick, go for it.
It's such a nuanced question, and I feel a lot of empathy, Jeff, as a student, I mean, as a teacher with all your different students, because the fastest way to misuse ethics is to want to define in advance ethics for everybody. So that's like the fastest way. Good guys turn into bad guys. That's like the origin story of every bad guy. Is like, I'm going to define ethics for everybody, and they're going to have to do it. It's like, okay, maybe that's, put that down, put the ethics down. So in a question like that, there is a tension. One thing that we've been doing from the beginning, and Sharon mentioned it, as a creative, we have a superpower of narrative. And humans tend to be very irrational. But if you can get them a very good narrative about why this is actually the future they want to live in, why this can be empowering to people like them, so they can connect to this longer thing where it's like the easy thing to do and the right thing to do are usually not the same thing. We're asking for a little bit more effort here, but it'll lead to a better outcome. We're designing to a more preferable future. And for some people, that's not going to work because some people are just, I care about the money. So an alternate track for those people is a narrative about sustainable innovation, because you can't have, you need to invest in sustainable products, and that requires you to create systems that are recoverable, right? So we have different narratives based on different audiences, because with other designers, it's very easy to tell a narrative about, hey, it's human-centered design, we're the champions for the people, and then rah, it's very tribalism, and then you go off in a PM or somebody, not certain types of PM or certain types of whatever, or certain will come in and say, I don't even care about all that, I need my bonus, right? So narrative and myth making is how you invest in long-term culture change. And that's what we've been doing for years at Ethics and Society. So it's not just critiquing or evaluating or giving certain design things, it's infusing ideas and narratives and things they can't unhear in terms of forcing them to live in that future that they're building. And if that's something that they really want to do. If you're still caught in a situation where you're working for a company where it's like, we don't have to be sustainable because we're a startup, so we just need massive attention as quickly as possible, and then we'll get bought out and it'll become somebody else's ethical problem. Well, in that case, you're stuck, right? But then it's up to you. If you want to stay there and make money, because I'm not going to judge you for that. That's your own life. Do what you want there. But you should be clear on what's going on too. The worst case scenario is you leave that company. That is the worst case scenario. And if you're going to stay, then you're aligning yourself in a professional mindset as a creative of I'm a problem solver for my client. But that will create tension. But that's everybody's own personal values versus what's prescribed ethical patterns.
Yeah. And Rick, to your point, I do think culture is a really important part, is the fabric of a company where you feel like that narrative and storytelling is going to land in some way, right? And you have to realistically ask yourself, like, does the fabric of this company allow me to ask this question and push back, or does it not? And I think if it aligns with your own values or not, then yeah.
I get really excited about this because I think the idea that you should teach ethics is like a sort of common first reaction. And I think, Rick, you mentioned that, but it's really about people have to come up with their own personal values and ethics. And because I think we've been thinking a lot about responsible computing in our department. And sort of the initial thing is always like, oh, well, we should be teaching our students to make sure that they, put the user first, and they come up with these like sort of guidelines, right? But it's very, and then everyone sort of agrees with that, but it actually doesn't really work in a lot of cases. And so what we do in our class is actually, in one class, the students will kind of write down their own personal ethics, and then we test them through a bunch of scenarios. And they can be very subtle things, like if you have a sign-up form when you buy a product, should your mailing list be opt-in or opt-out? Something like that, right? Even that is pretty divisive. And students, sometimes their ethics are some things like, well, everything on your in your product should be in service of the user. If you have something distracting or that doesn't help their task, that's unethical. And then we come up to this point where we're like, well, what about this thing that's supported by our ads? Is that ethical according to these principles? That's not, right? And then there's a whole discussion. So I think I love that idea of like, yeah, everyone has to have their own ethics, but it takes a while to iterate and build a sort of a set of principles that you can sort of live with. And I think that's part of the sort of education that's needed in ethics and design.
One thing that we're using, and Sharon, and I'll be brief on that, Jeff, is for our designers ourselves, and I consider our PMs and our researchers also, everybody comes in as creatives. So everybody leaves their titles out. So Sharon is just as deeply embedded in all of our design conversations as all the writers and content creators as well. But the phrase that we use is moral imagination, because you have to have that in order to break out your own personal values from what are the responsibility and the goals and aspirations of the product that you're solving for. So one of the exercises we have to do is be able to exercise empathy for people who have different values than we do, and exercise that moral imagination, because they might have very different ideas about everything you listed, Jasper. Parenting, right? The expression of the self over your societal obligation or your familial obligation. These are global factors, right? Education, like this. So all of these types of things. So that's what we do to keep ourselves honest, as we're constantly getting involved and generating moral imagination exercises to be able to defend somebody else's point of view that we don't agree with on this particular product.
Yeah. And I think just to tease that out, because I think often when people say, ethics, oftentimes at companies, we think of like an ethical advisory board who will tell you like, what is the right or wrong, like what is the ethical outcome? But ethics is so contextual, right? Like, what is my ethics versus your ethics? And really on our team, we've been really thinking more about like, what is ethical innovation? What is the process where we are responsible of how we innovate? And I think a lot of that is more about being intentionality, being purposeful, and to Rick's point, using our moral imagination to ask those questions, and can't unsee what we like put ourselves to go see, if that makes any sense, but versus focusing more on the outcomes, because I think that is very hard to say in a vacuum.
Yeah, then maybe also a question to both you and Rick, maybe, because moral imagination, like, I know like as designers, we really try to predict how something is used, but we cannot predict every use, right? And we've definitely seen that with social media. That started as a cool, fun little gadget, and now, oh, whoops, we have billions of users. And so what is your point of view on that unintended use or unimagined use?
I'm going to go first.
Yeah, Rick, Sharon, whoever wants to go first is
I
Rick.
spoke last, but I'll take it after.
Yeah, go for it.
One thing we did early on years ago, and it's still in practice, and we still get certain schools and teachers, even just this weekend came up. We made a card game early on called Judgment Call, because a lot of people, if you get a lot of designers in the room, just because we tend to have cultural and tribal and ideological kind of alignment of values, you always get the same types of first analyses, but truly divergent voices tend to not be in the room, right? So one of the things we did with Judgment Call is you go through a list of stakeholders, and then you have to assume one of those identities, and it was like giving a rating to a product, right, that you're going to do. And so you have to go a lot of role playing is very, very powerful if you do it and you mitigate it correctly, right? But that's one activity, which is kind of stretching your moral imagination. The other thing that we didn't mention is red teaming your own product, because this tech is hard and people are moving so quickly, and we've just come from 20 years of get it out the door and then we'll kind of fix it in post, or we'll fine tune it after, let's ship it and then we'll fine tune it. And with AI, with new deep AI and definitely foundational AI, you can't do that. Like, you have to get it right because it's non-recoverable. So it's this cultural shift with everybody involved that we tend to be positive in the thing we're making, and we're not thinking of making something to hurt the team. So you need to have permission and air cover to have a team out and red team it and say, if I were hacking this or if I were exploiting this, how would I do it, right? How would this thing that I love become a horrific Black Mirror episode? And even if it's just that, like, ask yourself, this thing that I'm making, what would Black Mirror do with this product? Like, even that thing, but red teaming and moral imagination kind of go hand in hand to get you out of the obvious connections your brain's going to make.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, like true devil's advocate.
Yeah. And I love that, Rick. And something that our team also likes to do is basically move from application to implication. And it's not like if you're designing a chair, thinking about the first order, second order effects, right? Like, what is the room that chair sits in? What is the house that room is in? What is the neighborhood? Really imagine the texture of the entire ecosystem and all the players involved. And so, for example, we always think about direct users and indirect users. And so direct users are often like your customers, your supply chain, your business person who's going to like purchase your product. But we also think a lot about who are the bystanders, the people who don't use your product, but are affected by it. So for example, in, the synthetic voice project I talked about, indirect users there would be like voice actors. This could potentially affect their entire profession. So our team did a lot of work interviewing them, understanding their concerns. We actually also spoke to like lawyers, because if you think about right now, like voice is something that could be used, recordings could be used in a court of law as evidence. What if you can't do that anymore? What does that mean? So there's a lot of these more nuanced implications that you have to be able to imagine, and that's the moral imagination, and from a lot of different perspectives. And we do a lot of user research on the team to understand that from the stakeholder perspective.
Yeah. And one other example that I heard you say when we spoke before on the same technology really is like, and this is also a Black Mirror episode, but related. But so what if I, have a artificial voice or the voice font of a deceased loved one? That sounds wonderful, but yeah, what was your kind of view on that, especially when it comes to consent and like it's complicated?
Yeah, I mean, Jeff, I would be interested in your perspective, but around when you said informed consent, that was really a principle that we stuck to. And so we had to ask ourselves, well, if someone passed away and, someone from their estate wants to preserve their voice in some way, but they didn't actually have informed consent in that process. And so, if we had someone do that before they passed away, yes, that would be okay. But we decided on any retroactive, that wouldn't be something that stuck to, again, our principle of informed consent. But it's very gnarly question. Sometimes I'm like, who am I to answer this? Like, I feel like I have to take like 5 philosophy courses to be able to parse through, but that's the reality that we're in. Like, technology's moving at such a rapid pace of innovation that as designers, we have to critically ask these questions. But yeah, Jeff, I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, wow, that's quite a puzzle. So So I don't know if I have an answer to that one right away, because that's hard for me to come up with something on the spot. But one sort of perspective that I often give with these sort of new technology things to figure out the right thing to do is to think, you mentioned like second and third order effects. I like to think of like the final order effects. And what I mean by that is like, imagine something like they were trying to, like when they were inventing the car, right? That was like a new technology that would change the world. There were probably a lot of really tricky decisions to make while they were working it out. But from our current perspective, we can actually go back and think, well, how has the car been? Like, if we went back from the start, would we have done it all over again? And because now we have sort of the lessons that we've learned from it. And so basically, like, and I'd say probably, like, we'd say, yeah, like we would invent again, but maybe we'd put seatbelts in quite a bit earlier and save a lot of lives. So a lot of this sort of like retroactive sort of thinking for past technologies is useful, but then I want to see if we can apply it to technologies that we're inventing now. So like, let's say with, I think Jasper and you mentioned the DALL-E sort of image generating and art generating AI. Well, if we do go, if we produce that at mass scale, what happens in like 20 years, right? Would we look back and say like, hey, that was a good idea. It saved, it generated a lot of art for the world, or we'd say like, oh, it put a lot of people out of jobs. So I think some sort of like thinking through exactly what's going to happen in the future is helpful, because like that's what potentially the end game would be like. And if you can sort of picture a good path to go, then that could help steer sort of the decisions you make now.
Yeah, interesting. So I do want to kind of stick with sort of the educational topic and the future, because we don't have the answer, right? We know that, but then how do we prepare our future designers and technologists to deal with these same questions much better than we do? How can we make our students today better prepared to deal with it, and also assuming that technology is going to be more capable at a fast pace? We all know Moore's law, and I think that's still pretty relevant. So what are your points of view on that? Sharon, I want to start with you, actually.
Yeah, I mean, as I said before, I think we all have this general anxiety now that, or maybe just me, that technology is just outpacing our ability to almost understand it. Like, Rick and I were working on GPT-3, which was the language model generation. And now DALL-E came out. We're like, oh my gosh, we're already on images. We haven't figured out language yet. Like, it's just already moving so fast. I think as designers, it's really critically understanding your responsibility, because I think like design is how things come to be, right? Like the objects, the services, the experiences you're building are shaping the future, and then the futures that come off of that. And they affect people and they affect societies. And I think it's easy for the mindset to be, I'm going to ship something and see the reaction. And I actually encourage designers, like, you guys should be almost imagining futures. Like, what is the future that I want? To Jeff's point, what is the future I want in the final order? What I want in 20 years, thinking about plurality of futures, like what are the probable futures? Where are we likely going to go? But what do I think is the preferable future? And how do we build towards that? And versus kind of this more narrow iteration and being like, oh crap, things are going bad, and no crap, things are going bad. And really taking that accountability. And that's what we're really trying to instill, at least in the culture at Microsoft, is this responsibility around innovation, because I don't think we understand all the consequences that then come out of it. So that would be my sense.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. It is difficult. It's not easy, but it is fascinating, and it almost sounded very sci-fi what you were saying. Actually, it's like a lot of possible universes right ahead of us. Jeff, as a professor, what is your point of view on this? As this is your job also.
Yeah, and probably I'm biased from what I do. I think one of the keys is sort of educating people about what AI can do, what it's about. I don't personally believe like AI is sort of this like magical thing that I think sometimes that is talked about in the media. I think at the end of the day, there are sort of optimizations. There are things that can optimize really well, whether it's to sort of impersonate a artist or a writer or play chess. They're all sort of trying to go towards single goals because they're programmed to do it. And so I think educating the people sort of designing and making those things is important. Educating the public about what they can do, what the limitations are, so that people can understand like why why are self-driving cars or chatbots so difficult to do, but they can play checkers perfectly, right? Like, so I think having that education piece, I think, is a core part of it. But also I think what everyone has been saying the whole time, like sort of thinking as designers and being introspective about what's the sort of future we want and how do we want to sort of what are at each point, sort of like thinking really hard about what are the principles that I have that go into this. And rather than sort of taking often you just sort of import a library or do something sort of by default. And if we're just a little bit more conscious about our actions as designers and programmers, I think that will be a big piece of that too.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, another thing came to mind is like, is it? Do you think it's ultimately the goal to make technology think like humans or like act like humans? You mentioned like a chatbot, right? They always attempt to make that feel like a human experience, and I wonder, is that the right goal?
That's hard for me to answer, huh? I think one goal of AI has been sort of general intelligence, right? The ability to be intelligent like a human. Right now, I think most forms of AI are more about like sort of interpolating in a way or optimizing using some some data out there or what people are training it with. So I think there's slightly different goals. But I think that's part of the education, is to understand sort of like what are the different types of AI technologies out there? How do we what do we incorporate into our designs and our products?
Yeah, and which version of the future do we want, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, Rick, I saw you raise your hand, and I know you have a couple of things to say here. Very curious.
Oh, well, first was on. Well, yeah, it's two really good questions, so I'll try and be brief.
Go for it.
First, on education, I used to teach like 20 years ago, and recently, or a few years back, we created a deep learning for designers workshop. And if we're scoping students to creative inclined people, right, to designer types or engineers who are coming at it from a holistic approach, right? One of the most important things that we do as creatives is we tend to problem solve intuitively at a pattern matching level. And most of these very complex technologies are not explained to right brain dominant or creative type people at a high level. It can be, that's not non-trivial. It's like, oh, well, like a neural net is like this, it's like your brain, but that doesn't mean anything to them. So there's a certain hands-on that you can teach. It's like a safari for creatives so they can understand, oh, this is a pattern. Because ethics, like design, you can't pre-solve them. If you have a student learning design, they don't learn design in those 4 years, and now they know how to do design as a hammer, and it's a series of lenses that they've grown. You can't pre-solve design, otherwise it'd be called engineering, right? So you can't pre-solve ethics. Ethics is negotiating this conversation of all the stakeholders. So the way it tends to work is you have to give people lenses and build up their lenses so that they can learn how to use the lenses for different problems so they can do pattern matching. Because most creatives start with pattern matching first, and we can cause a lot of problems if we don't understand how the technology wants to move. We're going to try and apply the wrong pattern to it because we don't understand this is different than the other tech that we did. So starting with patterns and retraining intuitions to think about ethics and designing for AI is far more important than learning how to code a specific engine or whatever that. Don't teach them the tools, teach them the patterns and the lenses. We also break down our educational branch into 3 big things, which are always moving forward. at the highest level of abstraction is questions we should be asking. As designers, that's what we get to bring to the conversation. They're pulling us into designing with AI. We should instantly be able to spot, these are the questions nobody's asking. And as design, we answer why, or at least we provoke people to answer that question why. So what are the questions we're not asking about this product? Is we have a disciplinary right to do that, to bring that into the room. We're not beautifiers, we're challenging why. So questions we should be asking, and we're not. After that is emerging answers that are kind of a sketch. Like, okay, here's the emerging answers to get you started, but jump in and start swimming and then share what you know. Like, this isn't etched in stone. This is a sketch, but let's get you in quickly and do your thing as a creative, right? Start jumping in, panic, learn to swim, and then start shouting out what you're finding as well, because you're right at the edge. And then finally comes guidelines, which is after the past 18 months, these are things that have kind of consistently been true. And the problem is that a lot of design courses for AI, they want to start at the bottom and go up. Here are the guidelines of what you should do. And they spend 4 years teaching them guidelines. And by the time they graduate, those guidelines are already obsolete because now we have DALL-E, now we have GPT-3. Yeah. So they just wasted 4 years learning tricks for something that's old news, right? So I prefer switching, and I advise switching to the other one, get them to start thinking how to ask the right questions and then give them emerging answers. They'll learn the guidelines based on whatever company they get. Like, every company will have their own guidelines. Don't worry about guidelines. Teach them how to ask the right questions.
Wow. Yeah, that's actually really interesting. I haven't even thought about that. How do we, is there similarities there in how we teach AI? Because I know, like, AI needs to be trained with something, and, you know, to Jeff's point, like, it's has a goal, it's computing, it's logical, right? But then can we apply that same model to AI, or has that been done already?
I would reply back, and I want to hear other people's. And Sharon, I'm sorry, Sharon, she listens to me ramble all day long, every day. So I apologize ahead of time. Your last question is fascinating because I was very nerdy. I don't know if you could tell or not, but I grew up in that usual geeky nerd path. And I was obsessed with the Turing test, of course, like everybody was before we got AI. And then at 2012, when we actually got deep learning, I stopped caring about it because all of a sudden it just seemed so cheap. All of a sudden, like, I don't care about making a mimicry or an imitation game of a human. There isn't one AI. AI is a universe of different things. And some AIs work a certain way and move a certain way, and other AIs work a different way. A lot of AIs we're talking about, or we've been exposed to, the public has been exposed to the past several years, are these AIs, that first generation, that needed a lot of curated data. So a lot of these issues around bias and stuff like that. But a lot of the second and third generation AIs that are emerging now, they are teaching themselves. They're being pointed to the internet, said read everything and then figure out how language works, right? Masking is coming in. They're doing all these types of things. The data sets are being huge. So there isn't one AI. And some AIs will try and mimic humans. And that's a domain-specific ethical conversation, right? I have my own personal opinions, but that's a corporate and industry level wide conversation. Should we mimic humans? Should we try to open general AI? For me, as someone who's creative and understands the math, I now have a new series of tools to help me ask better questions as a creative. AIs can now start computing in image space and in idea space and in word space. And that's something I didn't have before. All of a sudden, I don't care if an AI can pretend to be creative like a human. I want to have a conversation with the AI to say, this is how my human brain looks at this, and my creativity that jumps laterally goes like this. How do you look at it? And in your learned imaginary space, what connections are you seeing that I might be missing? And then having like a jazz conversation with AI. That's this synthetic creativity has kind of been my personal obsession and passion for a couple of years. I don't think of that as one AI or one AI trying to be human. I think we finally have a lot of nerds have had calculating computer partners for 50 years, and now creatives are finally getting to this point where we get to have creative computational systems that have their own opinions, and we can start sussing them out, right, in an early mode. So that's where my focus is.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love your term synthetic creativity. It's it kind of puts into words what I was thinking, like, you know, looking at DALL-E and like also doing the Google thing. It's like, I can see that's how I could use it, right? You know, when you're in a brainstorm or you're trying to come up with something and you can roughly describe it, but then you need to, you know, what's next? Is that is exactly what that is. That is super interesting. I know we're pretty much at time. I just want to kind of open up to Jeff and Sharon also, if you have any other thing you want to add to what Rick just said.
I mean, there are so many great points there, Rick. I think reflecting both on Rick, what you said, and Jeff, I think as designers, really pushing yourself to understand underlying technologies and AI that you work with, because that's been a challenge that we've seen at Microsoft also. I think remembering that, given that designers are keepers and crafters of the user experience, right? And if you don't know enough, that is the extent of what people who experience your application will also know. And it was very clear to us when we had very broken transparency or consent experiences. When we spoke to the designers and PMs on the team, they had no idea what was happening. And so because they didn't know, they couldn't explain it. And because they couldn't explain it, then people using it also didn't understand what was happening, right? And so it is a downstream effect. And so I think as we work with GPT-3 products in Microsoft, we've done a lot of education with product teams of understanding how GPT-3 works, what has it been trained on, talking about things like that. So that's what came to mind. Yeah.
Yeah, actually funny, kind of looping back to like that original point of how do we train the future designers. It's also just continuous learning for after school, right? It never stops. Yeah. Okay. So I want to see what the audience has to say. Sophia has been keeping track of all your questions. So I'm going to hand it over to Sophia to see what came out of that.
Yes. So, I mean, continuing off of talking about future designers, we had a question from the audience who was interested in learning more about what you were saying about kind of what are some examples of Gen 2 and Gen 3 AI. You direct them to learn more about this and like educate themselves.
I can give a word cloud. I think of how it's loosely spatially organized in my head. The very first wave, and let me do this quick. In 2012, the very first wave of deep models came out, and those were able to start at being completely wrong, but giving them examples, they could grow to good enough, to giving an opinion based on past work. So that's what we call probabilistic systems, soft data systems. So that's the first wave, and a lot of people are still stuck there. A lot of problems came up, but that's kind of this first wave. Anything that's just a probabilistic system instead of a calculation, it's been trained on previous data, so it's going to give you an opinion based on what happened before, and it will always think that the future looks very similar to the past, so it's going to make predictions that way. That's like the first wave, and that one's just like table stakes at this point. Like that's it's 8 years old. Around 2017 and 2018. GANs, and he started having generative systems that could come in that could start not just predicting things like the first wave was saying, I'm going to give you a picture and you tell me what's in the picture. And we had that. The second wave went the other way around. And this is with GANs, where it says, I'm going to give you a description and you generate a picture for me. And those types of generative things came in. And so I would call that distinctly different when you start thinking about generation versus just giving you opinions, right? So the second wave would be, what happened on this third generation is in 2019 or so, there's a new architecture called transformers, that came out and changed everything. And it kind of super powered that second generation. And now that's what we're seeing now with things like GPT-3 and DALL-E. So that's what I'd call synthetic media that middle generation. And now we're getting to this thing called foundational models and multimodal models that can think in multiple spaces. So you can train it on images and words, and it understands the idea. And then you can start doing things like this idea, but take away that idea and add this idea, and then make me a picture of that in the style of line art Picasso, right? Or whatever you want to do. And that's this foundational and multimodal models that are all based off transformers. That's kind of the bleeding edge right now. So that's how I would loosely group three big buckets. I should probably think about it more, but in my head, that's just where they're loosely grouped in my head.
Yeah, that's really interesting, your descriptions of the three. I wanted to pass to Jeff, and if you have any resources or anywhere that people might go to who are not currently in school and can learn about these things.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't teach AI, but I think my general take is, and I think I in general agree with what Rick and Sharon have been talking about. I think it's just, I feel the AI is a little bit less magical. I think even the current generations are still trained on data. It might be from the internet, but it's still like the Common Crawl or the image data sets that they have, and the questions like of the older questions about bias and like when were these crawled and how did they deal with filtering things out for the data sets, I think are still relevant. How do we design these models? What kind of biases do we have when we think about them are still important. So I think that those are things that I think we can contribute to as designers and developers and people that sort of make these things.
Okay, I guess this question can go to Sharon. We have a question here that says, consent for AI and biometric processes are a growing part of ethical and legal practices in regards to practical use of these technologies, but consent is difficult to explain and conceive of when people are capturing content in public. So how much of a design responsibility is it to make sure people see and read the end user license agreement details to create this understanding versus creating a smooth user experience?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I actually have a pretty good case study to maybe talk about it. I would say it is not your responsibility to make them read necessarily the EULA and CELA details, but it is absolutely your responsibility to understand, to our earlier point, what is the cost benefit trade-off and how do you communicate those salient points of understanding? And so the case study that our team had is 2 years ago, Microsoft realized all of our speech consent experiences were really broken. So basically when you're using Word or Xbox and a mic pops up, and after some time of using your voice to maybe do commands or dictation, they'll say, hey, we'd love to use your voice for product improvement. That dialogue box is really broken because people didn't understand that when they said, yes, I'm okay with using my data for product improvement, it actually meant snippets of your voice were getting sent to Microsoft. And this happens with every tech company that has speech AI. Real people, called human transcribers, will listen to it. And the AI will make a prediction on what you said, and people will make sure that that's transcribed correctly. And so and then when people found out, you saw these news articles being like, people at these companies are listening to your data, right? Listening to your speech data. And so we realized there was a really broken consent and understanding problem. People didn't understand when they said yes to what that meant. And so at Microsoft, we redesigned all of our consent experiences around that. And something that I'm pretty proud of, speaking to what are good KPIs, we actually created a Comprehension Kpi where every single experience that had to be shipped, they had to run through user research with, I think, at least 30 participants. And 80% of those participants had to be able to accurately answer comprehension questions. So they had to be able to answer, how long is your data stored for? Who has access to it? Where is it stored? If you want to delete your data, where do you go to change your mind? And if they could answer that correctly, then that experience was deemed passed and could ship. And so we really focused our entire narrative around user understanding to determine optimality for an experience.
That's really interesting how you test it too. Okay, we have one more question. What are some examples of companies that are creating positive narratives? Jeff, maybe if you want to answer that one.
Wow, that's a tough one. I think what I would say is, as I see a lot of my students going into companies, I feel like everyone sort of has a positive narrative for themselves in their minds, and everyone individual at the company can be wanting to do good. The challenge is that even in a company where individually everyone wants to do good, sometimes bad things can come out of it. And I think we just need to be a bit more critical of ourselves when we build things. And I think companies where people are given the ability to sort of challenge themselves internally, a culture of reflecting and sort of pushing back on sort of business metrics and business culture, I think are the companies that sort of generally I feel like are healthier. But I don't think I'd right now in the position to name specific companies.
Could be examples of what some companies have done. Doesn't have to be the prime Halo company. Rick, if you have any thoughts on that.
I think Sharon and I are a little biased, so I don't know if it's ethical for us to answer that question. So I'm not naming any company names at all, but I think we talked a little bit about a spectrum, right? And are the companies respecting you as a human with autonomy and a path to grow, and they're trying to champion the things that matter to you while mitigating societal harms, right? Because we can't be, here's how you do ethics and AI, step one, solve capitalism. Like you just can't, because you can't do that as a step one. That's not going to happen anytime soon. So within this context of making products and selling it to a market, what are the companies that are maintaining an integrity of their message? Is one of the filters that I have. A company I have a lot of respect for, of course, is Apple. I have a lot of Apple products myself. I use a lot of Apple products. I can speak about another company while I feel not right talking about Microsoft, because I'm clearly biased there. Microsoft would be number one. But from that, this idea around how they think about privacy and data, and are they empowering you through education to understand what's actually happening? Or is it kind of this fast food frosting where it's like you feel bad about yourself? Like nobody admits to going to McDonald's, everybody goes to McDonald's, right? And you go in because it's so flavorful and addictive, and the fats and the salts and the sugars, and then you eat it and it seems like it's good, and then 10 minutes later you hate yourself, right? Any product that's doing that, you should critique its narrative. Like, do you feel better about yourself after you've engaged with a day or a week or a month with this company, regardless of what their branding is saying? So separate narrative, because that was your question, I believe. Separate narrative from marketing. And really hear what their brand is. What is their true brand? Not how are they selling themselves to you? What is their true brand? How are they making money? What value are they bringing to your life? Is this a healthy relationship, or is it a kind of unhealthy relationship? Is there a codependency going on here? All of these questions, it's kind of like a relationship. All of these companies are offering themselves to be a partner in your life. So how would you judge your relationships? And I would think that would be the narrative that aspirational. We would all, of course, love to align ourselves better, right? Everybody's in different positions in their life and what you need in your career or money or whatever it might be. But that's what I would do for narratives. And there's some companies that have earned my loyalty because it's been with trust. Last statement, Satya consistently says internally, trust is earned in drops and lost in buckets. Like as soon as he took over and he said, we're doing AI, and before we even have products, these are the 6 ethical principles we're going to live by. That was a narrative. And then that narrative was, we're going to have to earn trust in drops and we can lose it in buckets. So be careful. And companies like Apple as well, and a couple others, I think they also try and hold to that line. And nobody's perfect, but if they try and hold to that line, that's great. Otherwise, it's just marketing.
Yeah, I think Rick, to your point, I think you can really gauge a company's narrative of when something goes wrong, how they handle it. Because I think, when that marketing and branding goes away, are they able to, when they do break trust, how do they meet that integrity? And like a lot of companies had a lot of tough situations. Like we were all watching Twitter during the election, and a lot of tough questions, right? And I respect companies for having to face those challenges. But I think that's something to stay attuned to, that they make decisions, after they fail and make a mistake, and how do they own up to it?
At the end of the day, companies are made of people and they change over time. I felt very differently about Microsoft 20 years ago than I did 10 years ago, than I would probably in 10 years. So
yeah,
that's very true.
The narrative
Okay, thank you
change.
for asking questions, for answering them. I'm gonna pass it back to Jasper to wrap us up here.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, thank you also for answering the questions in a great elaboration. I think that was very inspiring words towards the end from all of you. So thank you so much for all your time today, both the audience as well as our 3 panelists, of course. If you want to revisit this discussion, as I said before, in about a week, we'll post a recap and a recording on our website. So please do come back. Our next Smart Salon will be in about a month, June 21st, also starting at 5 p.m. and will be about big decisions or difficult decisions. So not too far away from ethical questions. You can sign up for updates and get early access on our website. We can post a link in the chat right now if you want to already sign up. So that's it for today. Thank you again, Rick, Sharon, Jeff. This was amazing. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I hope you did too. So thank you all for joining us, and I hope to see you all next time.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
all.
everyone.